Early afternoon, July 10th, 1944, a narrow road outside Le Dézert, Normandy, France. The commander of an M10 tank destroyer crouched low in his open-topped turret, scanning hedgerows that had turned the Norman countryside into a maze of death. His 3-inch gun pointed down the road. Behind those hedges, German Panthers waited. 45 tons of sloped armor and a 75mm gun that could penetrate his thin armor from over a mile away. The M10 weighed 29 tons. Its armor ranged from less than half an inch in places to just over 2 inches at its thickest. Against a Panther, this vehicle was outmatched in every specification that mattered on paper. Yet, over the next 2 days, his battalion would destroy 12 Panthers, 1 Panzer IV, and 1 assault gun in close-quarters combat that would prove something the Germans had fundamentally misunderstood about American armor doctrine. The question isn't whether the Wehrmacht knew about the M10's 3-inch gun. They knew. German intelligence had documented these vehicles since March 1943. They had captured M10s, examined them, tested them, and even disguised their own Panthers to look like M10s during the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans knew exactly what the M10 was. What they failed to understand was what it meant, not the technical specifications written in intelligence reports, but the operational philosophy that made this seemingly inferior vehicle a persistent threat across every theater where American forces fought. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The story of the M10 tank destroyer begins not with the vehicle itself, but with a radical reorganization of American anti-tank doctrine in the desperate months after France fell to German blitzkrieg in June 1940. American military observers had watched in horror as German feared armored spearheads punched through French defensive lines, exploited breakthroughs with terrifying speed, and reduced France to defeat in 6 weeks. The lesson seemed clear and catastrophic. Concentrated armor, properly employed, could overwhelm any defensive position built on static anti-tank guns. The United States Army had entered 1940 with an anti-tank doctrine that emphasized passive defense. Field manuals stressed mines and towed anti-tank guns positioned in fixed defensive lines. This approach had failed spectacularly against German mobile armor doctrine. If concentrated German tank formations could break through defensive lines at will, then America needed a new approach. Not more fixed guns, but mobile anti-tank reserves that could rush to breakthrough points and destroy enemy armor through aggressive maneuver and superior firepower. In November 1941, just weeks before Pearl Harbor brought America into the war, the Army established the tank destroyer, force as a separate combat arm with its own doctrine, training centers, and equipment requirements. The concept was revolutionary for American military thinking. Tank destroyers would be held in reserve at corps or army level, not distributed piecemeal along defensive lines. When enemy armor attacked and created a breakthrough, tank destroyer battalions would race to the threatened sector, establish ambush positions on the flanks of the enemy advance, and destroy the attacking armor through superior gunnery and tactical positioning. This doctrine demanded specific vehicle characteristics. Speed was essential to reach threatened sectors before enemy armor could exploit breakthroughs. Firepower had to be sufficient to destroy any enemy tank at combat ranges, but armor protection was deliberately sacrificed for mobility. Tank destroyers would use speed and agility as their defense, avoiding direct frontal engagements through superior tactical positioning and rapid redeployment after firing. The unofficial motto captured the philosophy perfectly: seek, strike, destroy. General Leslie McNair, commander of Army Ground Forces and the primary architect of tank destroyer doctrine, explained the economic logic in characteristically blunt terms. It was poor economy to use a $35,000 medium tank to destroy another tank when the job could be done by a gun costing a fraction as much. This would free friendly armored forces to attack more proper targets, the opposing force as a whole, in much the same manner as seacoast defences freed the Navy for offensive action at sea. The doctrine seemed sound in theory. In practice, it would require vehicles that didn't yet exist. Early tank destroyer efforts produced improvised solutions that satisfied no one. The M6 gun motor carriage mounted a 37mm anti-tank gun on a 3/4-ton Dodge truck. Over 5,000 were built in 1942, but the 37mm gun was already obsolete against German armor. The vehicle offered minimal protection and inadequate mobility for the aggressive maneuver doctrine required. The M3 gun motor carriage represented an improvement, mounting a 75mm gun on an M3 half-track chassis. Over 2,000 entered service between February 1942 and April 1943, but the gun had limited traverse, the vehicle lacked overhead protection, and the half-track chassis couldn't match the cross-country mobility of tracked vehicles. These interim solutions highlighted what was needed: a fully tracked vehicle with a gun in a rotating turret, sufficient speed for rapid deployment, and firepower capable of engaging any enemy armor at combat ranges. In January 1942, the Ordnance Department began developing a vehicle that would meet these requirements using the most available and reliable chassis in American production, the M4 Sherman medium tank. The prototype, designated T-35, mounted a 3-inch gun in an open-topped turret on an early production M4A1 chassis. The 3-inch gun derived from anti-aircraft weapons, but had been adapted for the anti-tank role. It fired a 17-pound armor-piercing projectile at a muzzle velocity of 2,600 feet per second, providing substantially better penetration than the 75mm gun standard on Sherman tanks. The turret design was adapted from development work on the abandoned T-1 heavy tank project. The original circular turret was replaced with a pentagonal welded design that provided better ballistic protection and a lower profile. The turret remained open-topped, lacking the overhead armor of a traditional tank turret. This design choice reflected tank destroyer doctrine. The open top reduced weight, improved crew vision for spotting enemy tanks, and simplified communication with supporting infantry. Overhead protection was deliberately sacrificed for other tactical advantages. Aberdeen, proving ground, tested the prototype through spring 1942. Concerns about thin armor led to the addition of bosses for applique armor panels that could be attached in the field if needed. The final production model, standardized in June 1942 as the 3-inch gun motor carriage M10, incorporated lessons from testing while maintaining the speed and firepower requirements that doctrine demanded. Fisher Body Division of General Motors received the production contract. Their Grand Blanc tank arsenal in Michigan would manufacture M10S using the chassis and powertrain of the M4A2 Sherman, which featured twin General Motors diesel engines producing 375 horsepower. Ford Motor Company would produce the M10A, one variant using the M4A3 chassis with a Ford gasoline engine. Production began in September 1942 and would continue through December 1943, producing nearly 5,000 M10S and over 1,700 M10A1S. The M10 measured just under 20 feet long with the gun forward, 10 feet wide, and 9.5 feet tall. Combat weight was 29.6 tons for the M10, slightly less for the M10A1. The crew consisted of 5 men. The commander and gunner occupied the left side of the turret, with the loader on the right. The driver and assistant driver sat in the front hull, though the assistant driver often moved to the turret to assist with loading during combat. The 3-inch gun M7 could fire several types of ammunition. The M79 armor-piercing shot, standard issue, could penetrate 92 millimeters of homogeneous armor, angled at 30 degrees from vertical at 1,000 yards. The M62 armor-piercing capped ballistic cap shell with high explosive tracer offered slightly less penetration, 88 millimeters under the same conditions, but provided better performance against sloped armor and included a small explosive charge. High explosive shells provided capability against fortifications and soft targets. Smoke shells created screening effects. The vehicle carried 54 rounds of 3-inch ammunition plus 300 rounds for the 50 caliber Browning M2 heavy machine gun mounted at the rear of the turret for anti-aircraft defense. Turret traverse was entirely manual, requiring the gunner to hand crank the turret through a full 360 degrees. This proved painfully slow, requiring approximately 2 minutes for a complete rotation. German tankers would later note this limitation, with professional interest, but the manual traverse had one advantage rarely mentioned in technical comparisons. It never failed due to electrical or hydraulic problems. In sustained combat, when German-powered turret systems suffered breakdowns, the M10's simple manual system kept working. The first M10 tank destroyer battalions formed in early 1943. Each battalion fielded 36 M10s, organized into 3 companies of 12 vehicles each, plus a reconnaissance company equipped with jeeps and armored cars. The battalions trained intensively in the aggressive tactics that doctrine demanded: rapid movement to threatened sectors, establishment of ambush positions using terrain and concealment, engagement of enemy armor at maximum effective range, and immediate displacement after firing to avoid counter-battery fire. Training emphasized that tank destroyers were not tanks. They would not charge enemy positions. They would not fight other tanks in direct frontal combat if it could be avoided. Their mission was to destroy enemy armor through superior positioning and gunnery, using mobility to achieve tactical advantage rather than relying on armor protection. Crews learned to think like hunters, not brawlers. The first M10s reached combat in Tunisia in March 1943 as Allied forces closed the ring around remaining Axis forces in North Africa. The 776th Tank Destroyer Battalion and the 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion deployed with their new vehicles just as the final campaign began. They would face German armor in conditions that would provide the first real test of both the M10's capabilities and American tank destroyer doctrine. The Battle of El Guetar on March 23, 1943, marked the M10's combat debut. German forces launched a counterattack against American positions, with panzer units supported by infantry attempting to overwhelm defensive positions. Tank destroyer battalions rushed forward to established ambush positions exactly as doctrine prescribed. The engagement demonstrated both the M10's potential and the challenges of coordinating highly mobile units in fluid combat. M10s from the 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion, fighting alongside M3 gun motor carriages from the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion, claimed 30 German tanks destroyed. The M10s proved substantially more effective than the half-track mounted M3s, with superior mobility, better crew protection, and a fully rotating turret that allowed engagement from any angle without repositioning the vehicle. German Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs, the standard German medium tanks in North Africa, had no answer to the 3-inch gun at combat ranges. The M10 could penetrate their armor frontally at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, but the engagement also highlighted vulnerabilities. The thin armor provided minimal protection against German tank guns and anti-tank weapons. Several M10s were destroyed by return fire. The open-topped turret exposed crews to artillery airbursts and infantry attacks from above. Tank destroyer doctrine assumed these vehicles would fight from concealment and disengage immediately after firing, but battlefield reality often forced direct combat at close ranges, where armor became critical. Over the following weeks, as Allied forces compressed remaining Axis troops into an ever smaller perimeter around Tunis and Bizerte, M10 battalions provided mobile anti-tank capability that helped prevent German armoured counterattacks from breaking the siege lines. The vehicles performed well mechanically, benefiting from the Sherman chassis' automotive reliability. Maintenance proved straightforward, with mechanics trained on Sherman tanks able to service M10s with minimal additional training. The North African campaign ended with total Axis collapse in mid-May 1943. Over 230,000 German and Italian soldiers surrendered. Among the captured equipment, Allied intelligence recovered German assessment reports of American weapons encountered during the campaign. These reports documented German awareness of the M10 tank destroyer and its 3-inch gun. Wehrmacht intelligence officers had examined knocked-out M10s, interviewed captured crews, and compiled technical data on the vehicle's capabilities and limitations. A German intelligence summary dated April 1943 described the M10 as a self-propelled anti-tank gun on a Sherman chassis, armed with a 76mm gun, noting the German practice of describing calibers by bore diameter rather than the American 3-inch designation. The report accurately identified armor thickness, ranging from approximately 10 mm to 57 mm, noted the open-topped turret and assessed the vehicle as dangerous when employed from concealed positions, but vulnerable in direct combat due to thin armor. This intelligence would reach Wehrmacht armor units across all theaters. The M10 was no secret. German tankers knew what to expect when they encountered these vehicles. What they fundamentally misunderstood was how American doctrine intended to employ them, and how that doctrine would evolve under the pressures of actual combat, far from the theoretical engagements envisioned by pre-war planners. The invasion of Sicily, in July 1943, brought M10 battalions into a different combat environment. The mountainous terrain limited opportunities for the rapid maneuver that doctrine emphasized. Tank destroyer battalions found themselves assigned to infantry divisions for direct fire support, engaging bunkers, fortifications, and infantry positions far more often than enemy armor. This pattern would repeat throughout the Italian campaign. German armor appeared in limited numbers, often in defensive positions rather than the massed breakthrough attacks that American doctrine assumed. M10 crews discovered their vehicles were remarkably effective in the fire support role, despite being designed for anti-tank combat. The 3-inch gun fired a high-explosive shell that proved devastating against fortifications. The vehicle's mobility allowed it to maneuver into firing positions that towed artillery couldn't reach. The open-topped turret, a vulnerability against artillery, became an advantage for observation and communication with infantry. Crews could spot targets more easily and coordinate with foot soldiers more effectively than tank crews buttoned up inside fully enclosed turrets. By December 1943, tank destroyer battalions in Italy were expending 15,000 high-explosive rounds per month in the artillery role. This was never the intended mission. Doctrine had envisioned tank destroyers racing to breakthrough points, destroying massed enemy armor, then withdrawing to reserve positions. Reality in Italy involved grinding positional warfare, where M10s provided mobile fire support for infantry attacks against prepared defensive positions. The 3-inch gun's relatively flat trajectory and accuracy made it exceptionally effective at this mission, though barrel wear became a significant problem requiring more frequent replacement than anticipated. The sporadic tank engagements that did occur in Italy introduced M10 crews to new German armor types. Small, numbers of Panther tanks and Ferdinand tank destroyers appeared on the Italian front. These vehicles possessed armor protection far superior to the Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs that M10s had faced in North Africa. The Panthers' frontal armor, 80 mm thick at 55 degrees from vertical, provided effective protection exceeding 100 mm against projectiles striking the sloped surface. The 3-inch gun could not reliably penetrate this armor frontally at any practical combat range. Crews learned to target weak points. Side and rear armor remained vulnerable. The turret ring, where the turret joined the hull, offered a potential target. Track and suspension damage could immobilize Panthers, allowing artillery or air support to destroy them. But direct frontal engagement became something to avoid rather than seek. The fundamental assumption of tank destroyer doctrine, that American anti-tank guns would possess firepower superiority over enemy armor, no longer held true against German heavy tanks. German tankers recognized this shift in the tactical balance. Captured documents from late 1943 show Wehrmacht armor commanders advising their subordinates that American tank destroyers posed significant threats when firing from ambush positions at flank or rear angles, but could be engaged frontally with confidence if German tanks could force a direct confrontation. This represented a reversal of the situation in North Africa, where M10s had possessed clear firepower superiority. Wehrmacht intelligence updated their assessments of American tank destroyers through 1943 and into early 1944. German reports accurately described M10 deployment patterns, noted their frequent use in the fire support role rather than pure anti-tank missions, and identified the vehicle's limitations against heavy German armor. A Wehrmacht tactical bulletin from January 1944 advised tank commanders that American 3-inch tank destroyers could not penetrate Panther or Tiger frontal armor except at point-blank range with side shots. This intelligence was correct. The Germans knew. They understood the M10's limitations. What they failed to grasp was that American doctrine was evolving in response to combat experience, and that the M10's true value wasn't found in the penetration tables that obsessed military planners on both sides. As 1944 began, the Allied invasion of Western Europe approached. 52 tank destroyer battalions would support the invasion and subsequent campaigns, many equipped with M10s, others with the newer M18 Hellcat, mounting a 76mm gun on a lightweight high-speed chassis, and a growing number receiving the M36 Jackson, mounting a 90mm gun specifically developed to counter heavy German armor. But M10 battalions remained the backbone of American tank destroyer forces, benefiting from proven reliability and the massive spare parts infrastructure supporting Sherman-based vehicles. Training in England emphasized new realities. The massed German armored breakthroughs that justified creating the tank destroyer force in 1941 were no longer happening. German forces fought defensively, using armor in small mobile reserves to counterattack Allied penetrations rather than launching the kind of massive blitzkrieg offensives that had destroyed France. Tank destroyer doctrine required adaptation. Battalions would be attached semi-permanently to infantry and armoured divisions rather than held in army-level reserves. They would provide direct fire support for attacks, defend against local counterattacks, and engage enemy armour opportunistically, rather than waiting for breakthroughs that never came. This represented a fundamental shift from the doctrine that had created the tank destroyer force. General McNair's vision of economical specialist vehicles racing to breakthrough points was giving way to the reality that modern combat required flexible fire support platforms that could perform multiple missions. The M10, designed specifically for anti-tank combat, was evolving into a general-purpose direct fire support vehicle that happened to be good at killing tanks when the opportunity arose. June 6, 1944, D-Day. Tank destroyer battalions landed on Utah and Omaha beaches starting with the initial assault waves. The 654th, 702nd, 703rd, and 803rd Tank Destroyer battalions came ashore on D-Day itself, their M10s struggling through beach obstacles and up coastal roads into the Norman hedgerows. More battalions would follow through June and July as the beachhead expanded and Allied forces pushed inland. The hedgerow country of Normandy created tactical conditions that negated many advantages that American armor doctrine assumed. The ancient field boundaries, thick hedge walls topped with trees, and built on earthen banks, divided the countryside into countless small enclosed fields. Visibility was measured in yards rather than miles. Maneuver was channeled along narrow lanes between hedgerows. Every field became a potential ambush site. The rapid movement and open terrain that favored American mobility advantages simply didn't exist. German defenders used the terrain expertly. Small numbers of tanks and anti-tank guns positioned in hedgerows could dominate approaches and destroy attacking vehicles at close range. The thin armor that tank destroyer doctrine accepted as a reasonable trade-off for mobility became a critical liability when combat happened at ranges under 200 yards. M10 crews found themselves fighting at knife-fighting distances, where their firepower advantage over German heavy tanks disappeared and their armor disadvantage became fatal. The first week of July 1944 brought American forces face-to-face with the reality of German heavy armor in Normandy. Tank destroyer crews who had trained to engage enemy armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards found themselves fighting Panthers and Tigers at distances where both vehicles could destroy each other with a single shot. The specifications that looked impressive in training manuals meant nothing when combat happened across a single hedgerow. July 6, 1944. General Dwight Eisenhower's headquarters issued an urgent directive. All M10 tank destroyer battalions should be converted to the new M36 as soon as possible. The M36 mounted a 90mm gun capable of penetrating Panther frontal armor at combat ranges. The 3-inch gun had proven inadequate against the thick armor of German heavy tanks. The directive reflected growing alarm at Supreme Headquarters about American inability to engage Panthers and Tigers on equal terms. 4 days later, that assessment would be tested in combat that would reveal something Wehrmacht intelligence reports had completely missed about American tank destroyer effectiveness. July 10, 1944. Near the village of Le Dézert, southwest of Saint-Lô, the 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion held positions along the American front line, attached to the 83rd Infantry Division. Their M10s were dug into defensive positions, hull down behind hedgerows with only the turrets and guns exposed. This was not the mobile reserve role that doctrine envisioned. These were fixed defensive positions, exactly the kind of deployment that tank destroyer doctrine explicitly rejected. The Panzer Division, one of Germany's elite armoured formations, launched a counterattack attempting to drive American forces back and relieve pressure on Saint-Lô. The division included substantial numbers of Panther tanks, the same vehicles that Eisenhower's headquarters had declared the M10 inadequate to fight. Wehrmacht intelligence had assured German commanders that American 3-inch tank destroyers posed minimal threat to Panthers in frontal engagement. The attack proceeded with confidence born of technical superiority. The Panthers advanced through narrow lanes between hedgerows, exactly the channeled approaches that defensive doctrine exploited. M10 crews held fire, watching through their sights as German tanks moved closer. Doctrine taught them to engage at maximum effective range, but combat experience had taught different lessons. Against Panther frontal armor, maximum range meant no penetration. Close range meant targeting weak points, side shots, and using terrain to create flanking opportunities. The engagement began at ranges under 300 yards. M10s fired from concealed positions at Panthers, silhouetted against hedgerows. The 3-inch armor-piercing rounds couldn't penetrate Panther frontal armor reliably, but they could penetrate side armor at these ranges. Crews aimed for turret sides, hull sides, and the vulnerable junction where turret met hull. They targeted tracks and suspension to immobilize Panthers, then shifted fire to side armor as damaged tanks turned to engage their attackers. The fighting raged for 2 days. German infantry supported the armored attack, attempting to flank American positions and destroy the dug-in tank destroyers. M10 crews used their .50 caliber machine guns against infantry, fired high-explosive rounds to suppress anti-tank guns, and engaged Panthers whenever they exposed vulnerable angles. The open-topped turrets, considered a design flaw by many critics, allowed crews to spot infantry threats and communicate with supporting American infantry, who provided close protection. When the battle ended on July 12th, the 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion reported destroying 12 Panthers, 1 Panzer IV, and 1 Sturmgeschütz, 3 assault gun. Most of the fighting had taken place at ranges of less than 200 yards. Not a single engagement occurred at anything approaching the 2,000-yard ranges that pre-war planners had envisioned. The M10 had stopped an elite German armoured division not through firepower superiority, but through superior tactical positioning, crew training, and the willingness to fight at ranges where both sides could kill each other. Wehrmacht after-action reports from Panzer Division expressed shock at the losses. German intelligence had assured them that American tank destroyers couldn't effectively engage Panthers. The technical assessments were correct. The 3-inch gun couldn't penetrate Panther frontal armor except at point-blank range. What intelligence reports had missed was that American crews would accept close-range engagements, use terrain to create flank shots, and employ combined arms tactics that multiplied their effectiveness beyond what technical specifications suggested. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The success at Le Dézert demonstrated something fundamental about the M10 that German intelligence had documented but never truly understood. The vehicle's value wasn't measured in penetration tables or armor thickness specifications. It was measured in operational availability, tactical flexibility, and the ability to support infantry and armored divisions across the full spectrum of combat missions they actually faced, rather than the theoretical missions doctrine had anticipated. German intelligence knew the M10's specifications perfectly. They knew its gun, its armor, its speed, and its limitations. What they never grasped was the operational system that made it effective despite apparent technical inferiority against heavy German tanks. That system included reliable automotive components inherited from the Sherman chassis, a massive spare parts supply network that kept vehicles operational, tactical doctrine that emphasized combined arms coordination rather than vehicle versus vehicle combat, and crew training that taught adaptive tactics rather than rigid adherence to theoretical engagement ranges. The contrast with German tank destroyer development revealed fundamentally different approaches to armored warfare. German tank destroyers, like the Jagdpanther and Jagdtiger, mounted powerful guns and heavy armor on sophisticated chassis. They represented the pinnacle of anti-tank weapon design. They also broke down frequently, consumed fuel at unsustainable rates, and required specialized maintenance that German logistics couldn't provide consistently across multiple combat theaters. The M10 represented American industrial warfare philosophy. Build reliable vehicles from proven components. Manufacture them in quantities that ensure availability. Design for maintenance by mechanics with basic training rather than factory specialists. Accept technical limitations in exchange for operational sustainability. This approach lacked the theoretical elegance of German superweapons, but it worked consistently across North Africa, Italy, France, and Germany, from 1943 through 1945. Wehrmacht intelligence reports from mid-1944 began noting patterns that technical assessments couldn't explain. American tank destroyer battalions maintained higher operational readiness than German armored units, despite fighting continuously. M10s appeared in every sector, seemingly in unlimited numbers. Even battalions that had been in continuous combat for weeks fielded nearly their full complement of operational vehicles. German Panther battalions, by contrast, averaged 40% operational readiness during the same period, with more tanks down for mechanical repairs than enemy action. A captured Wehrmacht tactical intelligence summary from August 1944 noted with professional frustration that American tank destroyers seemed to be everywhere, always operational and employed in roles far beyond their designed anti-tank mission. The report observed that these vehicles provided artillery support, engaged fortifications, destroyed infantry positions, and fought tanks opportunistically rather than exclusively. German commanders had no equivalent. Their tank destroyers were specialists, designed for anti-tank combat and poorly suited to other missions. The liberation of Paris in late August 1944 provided one of the war's most dramatic demonstrations of M10 capability at extended range, though under circumstances that Wehrmacht intelligence would never fully document. The French 2nd Armoured Division, equipped with American vehicles including M10 tank destroyers, fought through Paris streets against German defenders attempting to hold key positions. On August 25, 1944, an M10 named Sirocco, part of the Régiment Blindé de Fusiliers Marines, took up a firing position near the Arc de Triomphe. German forces had positioned a Panther tank in the Place de la Concorde, approximately 1,800 meters distant. The Panther's gun commanded the broad avenue, making direct approach impossible. French tank destroyer crews calculated range, elevation, and wind conditions, then fired. The 3-inch armor-piercing round struck the Panther's turret at extreme range, penetrating the side armor where it was thinner than the frontal plate. The Panther was disabled, its crew abandoning the vehicle. This engagement represented exceptional gunnery at a range where the 3-inch gun retained sufficient velocity to penetrate Panther side armor. It was also exceptional in being one of the few documented long-range M10 kills of a heavy German tank. The vast majority of M10 tank kills occurred at ranges under 500 yards, with most under 300 yards. Wehrmacht intelligence never received detailed reports of the Paris engagement. German forces in the city surrendered or withdrew in chaos, leaving no systematic after-action documentation. But the engagement illustrated something that German assessments consistently missed. The M10's 3-inch gun was adequate for anti-tank combat when crews used it within realistic tactical parameters rather than the theoretical maximums that specifications promised. The fall of 1944 brought the M36 tank destroyer into widespread service. Its 90mm gun could penetrate Panther frontal armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, finally providing American forces with a vehicle that matched German heavy tanks in firepower. Many M10 battalions converted to M36s through the autumn, but a significant number of battalions retained their M10s by crew preference, particularly in Italy, where the mountainous terrain favored the M10's superior automotive reliability over the M36's greater firepower. Tank destroyer battalion commanders submitted reports explaining their preference for the M10 despite its firepower limitations. The M36, built on the same basic chassis, was heavier due to its larger turret and gun. This reduced mobility in difficult terrain. The 90mm gun's greater recoil required a more robust mounting system that was prone to mechanical problems. Most critically, M36 spare parts were scarce, while M10 parts were abundant. A more powerful gun meant nothing if the vehicle was deadlined waiting for parts. These pragmatic considerations reflected lessons learned through 2 years of combat. Firepower meant nothing without mobility to reach firing positions. Armor protection meant nothing without mechanical reliability to stay in the fight. The best tank destroyer was the one that was operational when needed, not the one with the most impressive specifications. Wehrmacht intelligence documented American preference for operational availability over technical performance, but never fully incorporated this understanding into German vehicle development. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 demonstrated both M10 capabilities and German knowledge of the vehicle in ways that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Operation Greif, a German infiltration operation, involved disguising Panther tanks as American M10s to sow confusion behind American lines. This required detailed knowledge of M10 external appearance, dimensions, and operational characteristics. German engineers fabricated sheet metal panels to modify Panther hulls and turrets to approximate M10 silhouettes. The disguised Panthers bore American markings and were to be manned by English-speaking German soldiers in American uniforms. The operation achieved limited success before Allied forces identified and destroyed the disguised vehicles, but the attempt revealed how thoroughly Wehrmacht intelligence had studied American tank destroyers. They knew everything about the M10 except the operational system that made it effective. During the Bulge fighting, M10 battalions performed exactly as their training and experience had taught them. They engaged German armor from prepared positions, used terrain to create flanking opportunities, coordinated with infantry and artillery for combined arms effects, and maintained operational tempo through superior logistics and mechanical reliability. German armor, struggling with fuel shortages and mechanical breakdowns, couldn't match American operational sustainability regardless of individual vehicle superiority. The 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion held defensive positions near Normandy when German forces attempted to secure bridges over the Wehrmacht River. M10s engaged German armor at close ranges in confused fighting among villages and forests. The vehicles performed well mechanically despite bitter cold that caused numerous mechanical failures in German tanks. American logistics delivered fuel, ammunition, and spare parts consistently. German logistics, strained by fuel shortages and Allied air attacks, couldn't sustain their offensive. Superior German tank specifications couldn't overcome inferior operational sustainability. Through January and February 1945, as Allied forces recovered from the Bulge offensive and prepared to cross the Rhine, M10 battalions continued supporting infantry and armoured divisions. Their mission had evolved far beyond the anti-tank role that justified their creation. They were direct-fire support platforms that provided division commanders with mobile firepower for any mission requiring precision engagement. Tank killing remained part of their job, but only one part among many. Wehrmacht intelligence reports from early 1945 reflected increasing desperation, but also grudging respect for American operational capabilities. German commanders noted that American forces maintained continuous pressure despite weather, terrain, and determined German resistance. American vehicles remained operational. American logistics delivered supplies. American combined arms coordination improved constantly through adaptive learning that German rigid doctrine couldn't match. A captured German intelligence summary from March 1945 included a section on American tank destroyers that revealed how thoroughly Wehrmacht intelligence understood American vehicles while simultaneously missing their first significance. The report correctly identified M10 specifications, noted deployment patterns, and assessed firepower limitations against German heavy armor. Then it concluded that American reliance on technically inferior vehicles demonstrated industrial capacity overwhelming tactical competence. This assessment was exactly backwards. American industrial capacity enabled tactical competence by ensuring vehicles stayed operational. German pursuit of technical superiority produced vehicles that couldn't be sustained in combat. Wehrmacht intelligence documented this pattern repeatedly, but never acknowledged it as a systemic, American advantage rather than a technical limitation to be exploited. The final months of the war saw M10s fighting across Germany as Allied forces advanced from multiple directions. Tank destroyer battalions encountered decreasing numbers of German tanks as fuel shortages, and mechanical failures immobilized German armor faster than Allied action destroyed it. M10s increasingly performed fire support missions, reducing fortified positions and supporting infantry attacks against prepared defenses. The 893rd Tank Destroyer Battalion fought through the Hürtgen Forest, providing fire support in terrain that negated mobility advantages and emphasized reliable firepower. The 773 Tank Destroyer Battalion supported operations along the Rhine, engaging fortified positions with direct fire that towed artillery couldn't deliver with comparable precision. The 776th Tank Destroyer Battalion, which had fought in Tunisia with the Prise, first M10s to see combat, remained operational through Germany, with vehicles that had served since 1943, a testament to Sherman chassis reliability. German defenders noted in interrogations after capture that American tank destroyers appeared in every engagement, always seemed to have ammunition, and never seemed to suffer the mechanical breakdowns that plagued German armor. Wehrmacht veterans who had fought on the Eastern Front observed that American logistics surpassed even Soviet material superiority. The Germans had faced more T-34 seconds than they could count, but Soviet vehicles often sat immobile from fuel shortages or mechanical failures. American vehicles kept moving regardless of conditions. This operational sustainability, invisible in technical specifications but decisive in combat effectiveness, represented the true story of the M10 tank destroyer. Wehrmacht intelligence knew everything about the vehicle's gun, armor, and mobility. They never understood that. Those specifications mattered less than the system that kept M10s operational month after month across multiple theaters against determined German resistance. The M10's 3-inch gun couldn't reliably penetrate Tiger or Panther frontal armor, except at point-blank range. This limitation was documented in every intelligence report, emphasized in every German tactical bulletin, and understood by every Wehrmacht tank commander. What intelligence reports never captured was that American tank destroyer crews wouldn't fight Tigers and Panthers frontally when they could use terrain, combined arms coordination, and tactical patience to create flank shots where the 3-inch gun remained effective. German tactical doctrine emphasized fighting spirit and aggressive action. American tactical doctrine emphasized achieving mission objectives with minimum casualties through careful planning and overwhelming firepower. These philosophical differences produced radically different approaches to bis-Präsent combat. German tankers would charge American positions, trusting their armor superiority. American tank destroyer crews would wait for German armor to expose vulnerable angles, then kill it with methodical precision. Technical specifications predicted German victory. Combat results consistently favored American doctrine. The most decorated American soldier of World War II, Audie Murphy, earned his Medal of Honor using an M10's 50 caliber machine gun during the Battle of the Colmar Pocket in January 1945. The tank destroyer had been abandoned and was burning. Murphy climbed onto the vehicle and used its machine gun to repel German infantry and tanks for nearly an hour despite being wounded and under constant fire. The M10 eventually exploded from the fire, but Murphy's action had broken the German attack. Years later, when Hollywood filmed Murphy's story in To Hell and Back, producers couldn't locate an M10 for the recreation of this famous engagement. They substituted a Sherman tank instead. The vehicle that had been numerous enough to equip 52 battalions through 1944 and 45 had become rare enough by the 1950s that one couldn't be found for a major film production. The rapid post-war disposal of M10s reflected the Army's post-war decision to eliminate the separate tank-destroyer force and assign tank-killing missions to tanks themselves. This decision validated Wehrmacht intelligence assessments in a way German commanders would have appreciated. The specialized tank destroyer, designed specifically for anti-tank combat, proved less valuable than general-purpose tanks that could perform multiple missions. German intelligence had concluded this in 1944. The American Army reached the same conclusion in 1946, but German intelligence had missed why the M10 succeeded despite its specialization. It succeeded because American doctrine adapted to reality, while German doctrine insisted reality conform to theory. The M10 remained in service with Allied nations well after American forces retired it. The British had converted over 1,000 M10s to Achilles tank destroyers by installing 17-pounder guns that provided superior anti-tank capability. These vehicles served into the early 1950s with British and Commonwealth forces. France used M10s through the Indochina War. Israel purchased M10s from European scrapyards and refurbished them for service in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, later converting some to carry French 75mm guns and captured British 17-pounders. The vehicle's longevity in foreign service reflected the same qualities that made it effective in American hands. Reliability, maintainability, and adequate performance across multiple missions mattered more than optimal performance in any single role. Nations with limited resources and small military budgets valued vehicles that worked consistently with minimal specialized maintenance. The M10 met those requirements better than more sophisticated alternatives. Soviet forces received approximately 52 M10s through Lend-Lease. Red Army employment of these vehicles remains poorly documented, but available evidence suggests they were used primarily as self-propelled artillery rather than dedicated tank destroyers. Soviet anti-tank doctrine differed fundamentally from American approaches, emphasizing towed guns and infantry anti-tank weapons over self-propelled vehicles. The M10s appear to have been valued more for their mobility and indirect fire capability than their anti-tank potential. This Soviet employment pattern, like French use in infantry support roles and American evolution toward general fire support missions, reinforced a central truth about the M10. The vehicle succeeded because it could adapt to mission requirements rather than forcing missions to conform to vehicle limitations. German tank destroyers like the Jagd Panther were magnificent anti-tank weapons that performed poorly in any other role. The M10 was an adequate anti-tank weapon that performed acceptably in every role commanders assigned. Wehrmacht intelligence compiled comprehensive assessments of captured American equipment after the war ended. German engineers examined M10s in detail, measuring every component, testing automotive systems, and analyzing design philosophy. Their reports acknowledged American automotive engineering excellence, while maintaining that German vehicles possessed superior combat performance. This assessment was technically correct and operationally meaningless. The German reports noted that M10 transmissions used helical cut gears rather than straight cut gears, providing smoother operation and longer service life at the cost of some efficiency. American engines were less powerful per liter of displacement than German designs, but achieved greater reliability through conservative engineering. American automotive components incorporated larger safety margins than German precision engineering considered necessary. These design choices produced vehicles that worked consistently rather than vehicles that achieved maximum theoretical performance. German engineers recognized these patterns because they had seen them in captured Sherman tanks. The M10, built on the Sherman chassis, simply reinforced lessons already documented. American vehicles prioritized reliability over performance, sustainability over sophistication, and ease of maintenance over technical elegance. German engineers understood these design philosophies. They never acknowledged them as superior to German approaches, because doing so would have required admitting that German vehicle development had failed at the most fundamental level. The post-war American Army analyzed tank destroyer effectiveness through extensive statistical studies and operational research. The analysis concluded that tank destroyer battalions had destroyed substantial numbers of enemy tanks, but rarely in the circumstances that pre-war doctrine envisioned. Massed German armoured breakthroughs requiring rapid deployment of anti-tank reserves almost never occurred. Instead, tank destroyers fought as semi-permanently attached divisional assets, providing fire support across the full range of combat missions. The analysis recommended disbanding the separate tank destroyer force and assigning tank-killing missions to tank battalions equipped with vehicles possessing firepower adequate to engage any enemy armour. This recommendation was implemented in 1946. The M10 was retired from American service, with remaining vehicles either scrapped, sold to allies, or placed in storage for potential future emergencies. The specialized tank destroyer concept died with the tank destroyer force's dissolution. But the lessons learned through M10 employment influenced American armored vehicle development for decades. The importance of reliability and maintainability became explicit design requirements for all subsequent vehicles. The value of operational sustainability over maximum performance became doctrine. The recognition that vehicles must adapt to actual mission requirements rather than theoretical ideal missions shaped requirements for the M48 Patton tank, the M60 main battle tank, and ultimately the M1 Abrams. Modern American armor doctrine traces directly to lessons learned in World War II, including those learned through M10 combat employment. Contemporary main battle tanks emphasize operational range, mechanical reliability, and multi-mission capability. The M1 Abrams can engage enemy armor, support infantry, reduce fortifications, and provide mobile firepower across the full spectrum of ground combat operations. It was designed from the beginning for maintainability by soldiers with basic training rather than factory specialists. These design priorities reflect institutional memory of what worked in World War II and what didn't. The M10 tank destroyer tells a story that Wehrmacht intelligence documented but never understood. Technical specifications matter far less than the operational system that employs those specifications. Superior individual vehicle performance means nothing without the logistics to sustain operations, the maintenance capability to keep vehicles functional, and the tactical doctrine to employ vehicles within realistic operational parameters rather than theoretical maximums. German intelligence knew the M10's 3-inch gun couldn't reliably penetrate Tiger or Panther frontal armor at extended ranges. They documented this limitation in reports distributed throughout Wehrmacht armor units. They assured German tank commanders that American tank destroyers posed minimal threat in direct frontal engagement. This assessment was technically correct. Combat results consistently contradicted it because technical correctness proved tactically irrelevant. American tank destroyer crews didn't fight German heavy tanks frontally when they could avoid it. They used terrain to create flank shots. They coordinated with infantry to protect their thin armor. They employed combined arms tactics that multiplied their effectiveness beyond what individual vehicle specifications suggested. They maintained operational tempo through superior logistics that kept vehicles running when German armor sat immobile from fuel shortages and mechanical failures. These operational advantages never appeared in Wehrmacht intelligence reports because intelligence analysts focused on technical specifications they could measure rather than operational capabilities they couldn't quantify. German reports documented American industrial superiority but interpreted it as brute force, overwhelming of German technical excellence rather than a fundamentally different approach to armored warfare. This interpretation allowed German military culture to preserve its self-image of technical sophistication and tactical superiority while losing a war that industrial capacity and operational sustainability decided. The M10's combat record validates an uncomfortable truth about military technology. The most sophisticated weapon isn't necessarily the most effective weapon. The weapon that achieves theoretical maximum performance isn't necessarily the weapon that wins battles. The weapon that wins battles is the weapon that remains operational when needed, adapts to missions as assigned, and integrates into combined arms operations effectively enough to accomplish objectives regardless of technical limitations. Wehrmacht intelligence knew everything about the M10 except what made it effective. They measured its gun penetration, documented its armor thickness, calculated its speed and range, and assessed its tactical limitations with Prussian thoroughness. They never measured the logistics network that kept M10s operational. They never calculated the maintenance hours required compared to German equivalents. They never assessed the tactical flexibility that allowed M10s to perform missions far beyond their designed purpose. These factors won battles, while German intelligence focused on technical specifications that predicted battles German forces consistently lost. The greatest irony of German intelligence assessments of the M10 wasn't what they got wrong about the vehicle's technical specifications. They got those exactly right. The irony was that knowing everything about the vehicle told them nothing about why it succeeded. The M10 wasn't a better tank destroyer than German equivalents by any technical measure. It was a better system component than German equivalents by every operational measure that mattered in sustained combat. An M10 tank destroyer stands today at Fort Moore, Georgia, preserved as part of the United States Army Armor and Cavalry Collection. The vehicle bears scars from decades of hard use but remains structurally sound, a testament to engineering designed for durability rather than sophistication. Visitors can examine the 3-inch gun that Wehrmacht intelligence knew couldn't penetrate heavy German tank armor. They can observe the thin armor that German tactical bulletins identified as the vehicle's critical vulnerability. They can see for themselves the open-topped turret that German reports noted as a significant design limitation. What visitors cannot see from examining the preserved vehicle is the operational system that made it effective despite apparent technical inadequacies. They cannot observe the logistics network that delivered spare parts anywhere American forces fought. They cannot measure the maintenance doctrine that kept vehicles operational with mechanics possessing basic training. They cannot experience the tactical flexibility that allowed crews to adapt to mission requirements regardless of whether those missions matched the vehicle's designed purpose. Wehrmacht intelligence examined captured M10s with the same attention to detail that modern museum curators apply to preserved vehicles. They measured, photographed, tested, and analyzed every component. Their reports documented technical realities with precision that historians still reference. What they never captured in their intelligence summaries was the fundamental lesson that the M10 represented. Victory in modern mechanized warfare belongs not to the side with the most technically sophisticated weapons, but to the side whose weapons remain operational, whose logistics sustain operations, and whose doctrine adapts to reality rather than forcing reality to conform to doctrine. The 3-inch gun couldn't kill tigers at 2,000 yards. Wehrmacht intelligence knew this. American tank destroyer crews knew this. The difference was that German intelligence thought this limitation mattered, while American crews treated it as an irrelevant technical detail compared to the mission of destroying enemy armor by whatever means tactical circumstances allowed. German doctrine said tigers were invulnerable to 3-inch guns frontally. American doctrine said find flank shots, or call for artillery support, or coordinate with other elements for combined arms solutions. One approach preserved theoretical purity. The other approach won battles. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.